Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 on a series I'm making about programming concepts for beginners. If you haven't watched part 1, then please do. I've linked the video in the description. Also, I've added a list of timestamps in the video description, so please feel free to skip ahead to the parts that are most relevant to you. Without further ado, let's begin this video. So the first concept which we'll be covering today is conditional statements, which are basically a way of allowing your computer program to make decisions for you and perform different tasks depending on if the value of a condition is true or false. Conditional statements usually come in the form of if, then, else. For example, if I'm leaving my house and it's raining, then I'll bring a coat or an umbrella. Else or otherwise, I won't bring a coat or umbrella. These conditional statements are usually very useful when you want the program to perform different tasks or operations depending on the value of a variable. For example, let's say you have a variable x and you want to print a different message depending on how big the value of x is. First, write the if statement with the condition that you want to check for. For example, x is greater than 10. Followed by the action that you want to perform if the condition is true. Next, you can write an else clause or statement which will run if the condition is false. When you run this program, only one of the messages that you wrote will be printed depending on what the value of x is. If you want to create more dynamic, intelligent programs, then I definitely recommend that you experiment with different styles of writing conditional statements in whatever programming language you're currently learning. In many programs, you may have to repeat the same task or operation multiple times, but what you don't want to do is rewrite the same line of code again and again. This is a perfect opportunity to use loops. With loops, what you're doing is giving the computer a task and telling it, hey, do this task 10 times or 100 times or however many times you need to repeat the task for this particular operation. In most programming languages, there are two main types of loops, which are for loops and while loops. In a for loop, you can define exactly how many times you want the for loop to run. For example, here is a for loop that will run for exactly 100 iterations. In a while loop, however, you tell the computer to continue to repeat a task as long as a Boolean condition is true. In this way, they work very similar to how if statements check for a conditional value. Because of how useful loops are, it is crucial that you understand how they work and how you can use them in your programming language of choice. So last week we discussed how variables are useful if you want to hold a single piece of data. But what if you want to hold a collection or list of data? That is where arrays come in, also known as lists in some programming languages. In some programming languages, arrays are static and can only store values of a single data type, for example, a string array. Whereas in other more dynamic programming languages, arrays are dynamic and can store multiple different data types in a single array. A useful tip here is that in most programming languages, arrays are defined using square brackets. Each value in an array has an index associated with it, which is a number that represents its position inside of the array. In most programming languages, arrays use zero-based indexing, which means that array indexes start at 0 and increase from there. Once you've created an array, you can access any specific value in the array by using that value's index. For example, I have this Python list, and I can access the first item in the list by using the index 0 and the second item in the list by using the index 1. Alright, the last concept which we'll cover today is functions. Functions are used to group certain tasks together that you want to perform over and over again. Think of a function like a black box, which you use to accomplish a specific task. You can feed it some input, also known as function arguments, let it do its work, and it returns you some sort of output. Let's say you're coding a program where you find that you keep having to manually calculate the average of 3 numbers. This is a perfect opportunity to use a function. First, declare the function by giving it a specific name that tells you what it does. For example, calculate average, followed by a pair of parentheses. Inside these parentheses, you can define the input or arguments that you want this function to receive. For example, since we're calculating the average of 3 numbers, let's say we receive 3 pieces of input. The names of these arguments are totally up to you. Next, we can define the actual code that goes inside the function. So to get the average, let's just add the 3 numbers and divide them by 3. Now that we have our answer, we need to return it. This is how you get the function to provide output which you can then use in other places in your code. Now that we have our function set up, we can call it by using its name and providing 3 input values or numbers. Since we said earlier that the function will return some output, we can also assign the function call to a variable. This means that after the function has finished executing, the output it returns will be stored in this average variable you see here. We developers hate repeating ourselves so much that we have a popular acronym in the industry, DRY, which stands for Don't Repeat Yourself. So always look for opportunities to use functions to automate repetitive tasks and reduce the amount of code you repeat. Alright guys, so those are all of the fundamental programming concepts that a beginner should know and master before they can move on to more advanced programming concepts like object-oriented programming, concurrency, or asynchronous programming. If you enjoyed this video, then let me know in the comments down below and consider subscribing. We talk about topics just like this every single week. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.